I've titled this video, The Frank Factor. As you grow, your problems shrink. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, keep it as short as I can. Frank used to be my general manager. The very last job I ever had back in the 1980s, I was a welder in a mobile home factory, and Frank's job was to see that my crew got the largest number of frames out on a daily basis. I was working on a 6-man crew, and I was a terrible welder. The only reason Frank couldn't fire me was because, number one, I was trying as hard as I could, and I was really making an effort. But the main reason he couldn't fire me is because the guy that ran the whole factory, he had a soft spot for me because we grew up in the same small town a couple hours away in Great Bend, Kansas. So I was in Newton, Kansas, working as a welder on a mobile home, on a factory that made mobile home frames. And I was a terrible welder. The only reason I took the job or wanted the job is because I had no other skills or knowledge or whatever. I was making a few dollars an hour more than all my friends who were working construction jobs or other unskilled labor kinds of jobs. But I was a terrible welder. Frank wanted to fire me. I was always slowing down my crew. And here's the thing. He did everything he possibly could to get me to leave. He was on my ass constantly. I worked there for 3 years. He was on my ass constantly and doing everything he could to intimidate me and harass me because I was making mistakes that ended up costing these guys. We were all on a commission kind of thing. After a certain number of frames we had to do every week, we got a little bonus. So 20-25% of our income came from busting our ass every day, so that we could eat, pick up a couple $100 extra a week or a few $100 extra a week or whatever. I was always slowing the crew down. They were always having to wait for me to fix all of my errors that I was making on these frames because I wasn't a good welder. And Frank was doing everything within his power to get me to quit. He was making my life hell. So finally, after several years of this, where every day I just hated going to work, because Frank was going to be there and he was going to do things to make my life difficult. So I told a good friend of mine, I said, look, I can't take this anymore. I'm going to have to quit. I just can't do it anymore. And this friend of mine, who was smarter than I was, he said, look, since you're going to quit anyway, you're going to quit, right? I go, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I've been doing this for a couple years. This guy's driving me crazy. He's embarrassing me in front of my crew. He's doing everything he can to get me to quit. And I just can't take it anymore. He's driving, and he's making me miserable here. So my friend said these words. He said, look, since you're going to quit anyway, you might as well just go in there and take a stand. You might as well just take a stand since you're going to quit anyway. Just tell him he's never going to be able to treat you like that ever again, and just stand up against him. He's bullying you. And so that's exactly what I did. The very next day I went into work. Sure enough, within a couple hours I had made a mistake. The whole line had to slow down. Here comes Frank, out to do everything possible to make my life difficult. He was my boss, I had to take his crap, so to say, but not that day. Not that day at all. I let him go off on me like he always did, telling me what a bad welder I was and how I was slowing the crew down and that kind of thing. Treating me poorly. And then very firmly, I just said to him, I was in my 20s at the time, I said to him, and I paused for dramatic effect, at least that's how I remember it. Maybe I've dramatized it over the years. But I just said, Frank, you're never going to treat me like that again. I said, you don't treat any of these other guys like that. You're not going to treat me like that. Do you understand? And he was like, really, you could just see it in his eyes. I mean, it was just like a deer in the headlights, so to say. And then he didn't know what to say. I said, look, you've been treating me like this for a couple years. I said, you don't treat any of these other guys like that. You don't yell at them. I said, I know I made a mistake here. I know I'm slowing the crew down, but I'm doing my best. You're not going to treat me like that ever again. Do you understand? And again, he didn't say anything. I think I had to do it like 3 or 4 times, as I remember. I had to go 3 or 4 times to the point where now I was kind of speaking firmly to him. And I was saying, you are not going to treat me like this ever again. I said, you can fire me if you want, but you're not going to treat me like this again. Do you understand? And finally, he never did acknowledge. He never did say, yes, I understand, or any of that. He walked away. And I worked there for a whole nother year after that. Still the worst welder on the crew. Still slowing the line down, frustrating my other teammates that were part of my crew. I never did get to be a good welder. But here's the cool part, the coolest part. And then there's a punchline to all of this. Frank never treated me like that again. He was always respectful. He never yelled at me again after that. Never, 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 never. Now, the cool part of the story, when I told you in the beginning, as you grow, your problems shrink. Here's a guy that drove me crazy for a couple years, really just made me, or I said he drove me crazy. Nobody really has that. The power we get, the power that, you know, when nobody makes you angry. You give them the power to make you angry. It's a decision that you make, ultimately. But I ran into Frank about 10 years later. Now by this time, I had already started several successful businesses. I had already made millions of dollars. I ran into him at my favorite Mexican food restaurant. He was there eating with his wife. And the whole time I'm eating with my wife, I'm thinking, God, do I go over and say anything to him? Do I say anything to him? I really didn't want to. You know, it wasn't my favorite guy. But I did. I took the high road. After I got done eating, I went over to him and I said, hi, Frank, how you doing? He got up. He shook my hand. He had heard that I was successful. I was in a small town. He had heard that I was successful in business and that I had done well. And he shook my hand and he said hello to me and introduced me to his wife, who I never met his wife before. I introduced him to my wife. And I walked out of that restaurant. But here's the thing. He had shrunk. Now, granted, age will do that to a person, okay? Age will shrink people. But you see, here's this guy that used to just cause me so many problems that in my mind, he was such a big man. He had the authority, to fire me and and that kind of thing. But I gave him so much power. And the truth is, he was a little tiny guy, really. I never knew that before. I hadn't shrunk. I'm 6'1". But I never realized how short of a man he was. He was always abusing me, always yelling at me. He had shrunk. I had made him much bigger than he deserved. That's what happens when you let people drive you crazy or make you angry or frustrated. You're giving them more power than they deserve. You really are. And as you grow as a person, and I did, back when Frank was my boss, I had a lot of self-esteem issues. I had poor self-esteem and I was very insecure in myself and that type of thing. I had no real confidence. I had some ego back then, but no real confidence. And now I had grown as a person, and Frank, really in my mind, I kept thinking, is this the guy that used to make me crazy, or is this the guy that used to drive me crazy? Because he was just a little man at that point. But I had grown. I had grown, and look, if people are always going to do things to disappoint you, frustrate you, bully you if you let them. Don't let them. Don't let them. Don't give them that kind of power. Don't give them that kind of control of your life. The Frank factor. Remember the Frank factor. As you grow, your problems shrink. And when I saw Frank after 10 years, I'm thinking, God, why did I let this guy drive me crazy like that for so many years before I finally took a stand? So if you've got people in your life that are bullying you or abusing you or taking advantage of you, just take a stand. Don't let them do that. And in business, we're always going to have to deal with people. People will always let you down if you let them, or some people will. So just don't let them do it. I hope something I've said here has helped you. If it has, go to my website at heytj.com. That's HEYTJ.com. Drop me a line. Remember the Frank factor, though. Who are the people in your life that are making you upset right now? Don't let them. Don't give them that kind of power. Thank you, and bye for now.